Welcome everybody to Stone Cold Steve Austin Broken Skull Sessions. This is Tap Out Talk. In today's episode, we're going to find out who's next. And on that question, who's next? Goldberg is next on today's episode of Tap Out Talk, and he is episode 2 of the Broken Skull Sessions podcast. Remember how this works, guys. This is the podcast of the podcast. We're going to go through everything that Goldberg had to say on this episode in quick, easy format and quick, easy sessions. So if you don't want to spend an hour watching the WWE Network and the actual podcast, and you just want to taste a little bit of what Goldberg had to say and take away the highlights and delights, this is the right spot for you. So let's go ahead and start in with the first point of the podcast. That is the stunt double. Did you know Goldberg and Stone Cold Steve Austin used to be stunt doubles? Not really. So that would be a false statement. What we did actually learn on this podcast, though, is Goldberg mentioned that it used to, back in the day, really piss him off when people would mistake him all the time for Stone Cold Steve Austin. He told Austin that. Austin got a good laugh out of it. But nowadays, Goldberg said he takes it as a compliment. And I think a lot of that was just due to him starting out, in the industry, trying to make a name for himself in WCW. And if anything, this just proves what a mega star that Stone Cold Steve Austin was. But I think really the similarities to the casual everyday viewer would be, hey, you got two bald guys, you've got goatees, kind of built, gotta be wrestlers. Oh, that must be that Stone Cold Steve Austin guy. The reality is, these guys definitely don't look alike other than those similarities, and they definitely don't wrestle the same either. So the stunner versus the jackhammer, completely different move sets. So, but I think it was just a nice way to kind of open up the session and just have a nice little laugh about that, and the two exchanged. Next, we get into a little bit of the football career of Bill Goldberg. And as you guys know, Bill Goldberg, the 6'3", 266-pounder, was the defensive tackle at the University of Georgia where he played. He originally was from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was drafted later on in his NFL career. So after a hot college start, he was actually drafted by the Los Angeles Rams in the 11th round, in number 301 overall. He played for the Rams, and then he had a brief stint with the CFL, Sacramento Gold Miners, so the Canadian Football League. At that point, he then played for the Atlanta Falcons from 1992 to 1994. So he had a couple years there at the pro level for the Falcons, going back to Georgia again. And then after that, he was cut by the Falcons in 1995. He was then picked up by the Carolina Panthers, who was an expansion team at the time in the NFL. Although he never played due to injury, he actually tore up his lower abdomen off of his pelvis. Think about that for a minute. Tearing the abdomen muscles off of the pelvis. Painful, right? That's a whole other form of belly aching. But he was the first player to be cut by the Carolina Panthers in the history of the organization. So I don't know. If that's a kind of record you want to be known for, but Goldberg does seem to be right on top of that fact in this session. As you guys know, Goldberg then from there went on to the world of pro wrestling, and we'll get to that here in a minute. But let's talk about a few other things with football. Kevin Green is that other thing. So Hall of Fame profiler Kevin Green, Hall of Fame football player, was the individual who actually is responsible and convinced Bill Goldberg to get into wrestling. If you recall, Green actually was a professional wrestler in WCW, and he made quite a bit of appearances in some tag team matches and a couple other multiple matches. And, Goldberg gives Green a lot of credit in saying, hey, he's the one that kind of bridged the gap from from football to pro wrestling right on over. So I found that kind of interesting. And, there's an old saying in wrestling, it's sometimes it takes a king to know a king, right? So a football player to know a football player to get them into pro wrestling. But, wrestling has a history of football players transitioning over as much as it is with the UFC and MMA guys today. Then we get into WCW versus the WWE. So back in the day, the WCW actually, believe it or not, had the WCW power plant, was really the precursor to what would be known today as the WWE Performance Center. So Goldberg felt he didn't stand out since he was in camp with Bob Sapp. So if you don't know the name Bob Sapp, he was a massive draw in Japan. And as a kickboxer and a mixed martial artist, he wasn't particularly great, but possessed, really freakishly size and strength. But yeah, the WCW power plant, they were the first WWE Performance Center. And I don't think they get enough credit in the industry for like kind of being the one that really, started the training center for WCW. I remember, as a kid, seeing the commercials, and foolishly I'm like, ooh, I should call that and go start my career, right? But the reality is, I mean, this is where the big boys trained. And then today NXT and the WWE Performance Center has taken that idea and just really maximized it. So Goldberg did start there, even though he admitted that he really didn't know too much about the wrestling business and was very green and a rookie at that, but just a superior athlete. Then we get into his WCW debut. And one thing is, that was actually his first match ever. Goldberg stormed on the scene, and Stone Cold really put over, at this point in the show, Goldberg's televised debut, and in particular his small mannerisms and intricacies that, such as not allowing the ref to raise his arm, the cover, following the jackhammer, etc. So Stone Cold really kind of chimed in and said, I really liked your first match. Which was with a gentleman named Hugh Morris, right? He was a laughable character, hence his name. Wrestling is a little gimmicky like that. So his name is Humorous, or Hugh Morris, and he laughed a lot. You can kind of get where they're going there. So Goldberg talked about his debut against Humorous, and then the follow-up match with the Barbarian, and how Eric Bischoff actually yelled at him in his second match for going up on the top ropes. And he said, Eric Bischoff told him, you'll never do that again. It's a high risk, and we don't want to get you hurt. So he actually got in trouble in his second match. But again, the Barbarian was the veteran that kind of advised him to do it. So, but yeah, Stone Cold did a really good job kind of praising him for being, his first match ever, and just could tell that he was a student of the game and knew these little things that he was doing. So, and then that is when I remember the infamous streak just kind of started out and happened. And in WCW, his debut, I remember he stormed on the scene, but we didn't even know his name really. And then week 2 came, he beat another guy, and they acted like they didn't know who this guy was, and they didn't know that he was former football player Bill Goldberg. And in one interview, Mean Gene Okerlund actually announced, I know who you are. Every time he tried to catch an interview with Goldberg during this time, Goldberg was just blow past him. And this would happen for weeks on end until we actually found out this mysterious beast's name. And man, what a great start to a streak and a career that we'll talk about. We get into the next section. We talk about who was most helpful to Bill Goldberg in his career. And it might be a name that you haven't thought of. And that name is beautiful Bobby Eaton. So Bobby Eaton gets a lot of praise here for Bill Goldberg. Goldberg feels the one thing he's more proud of than anything in the world has to do with Bobby Eaton. Eaton helped him out tremendously, which ultimately saw him put Goldberg over in Bobby's hometown. In fact, Goldberg begged Arn Anderson to lose to Eaton the night to Eaton out of respect. He begged Arn Anderson, please let me lose to Bobby Eaton. I want to end my streak to him. I'm good. And, they said, no, we're not pushing Bobby Eaton. We're pushing you. In my humble opinion, Bobby Eaton is truly one of the unsung heroes of the wrestling industry, and he was effortlessly smooth and remarkably unselfish. And I heard a lot of stories about Bobby Eaton being a guy behind the guy that would always like to help those guys. And so, and I think Bill, Big Bad Bill, definitely appreciated that. And man, what a world if Bobby Eaton broke the streak. I don't know where you would have went there, but this is pro wrestling, and you got to save that for a way better time for that streak to be broken. And speaking of the streak, we noted Goldberg noted that streak, and the timing were both completely organic and never pre-planned. So WCW never came up with an idea and said, hey, we should do the streak and turn you into this monster. It was completely organic, and it was cool. I mean, it was amazing to sit here and watch Bill in his heyday. The streak ended up being 173 wins and 0 losses. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. 173 matches and 0 losses. It is the longest streak in professional wrestling upon a debut of any wrestler. So right there is a little history here on Tap Out Talk for you guys. I'm going to learn this. So Goldberg noted this. And in this conversation, and then you get to a point, you're like, well, how are you going to end this streak? What's going to happen? Because you build up and an instant star that WCW needed, right? They're in this Monday Night War, and they needed a guy to rise up to be the guy other than Sting and Flair. And Goldberg was that new, fresh star that was able to come in and just create this streak. And, he became so big, he was able to take on the whole NWO, which was a whole big deal. I remember this one, triple threat Rumble match, basically, Battle Royal match, where it was NWO Black and White versus NWO Wolfpack versus Bill Goldberg. So Goldberg was his own group entity in this matchup. So the streak, definitely a huge moment. And then it all had to come to an end, like most great things. And that man to actually end the streak. And a lot of people have different ideas as fans of who should have ended the streak. And if I come to think of it, I would be hard-pressed to think about who should have ended Bill Goldberg's streak. I would have been implied to maybe have somebody like Diamond Dallas Page. That way I can build a second star there. But that man at the end ended up being Kevin Nash, who might not have needed it. But, and it wasn't even a Kevin Nash winning. It was actually Kevin Nash in a cattle prod by Scott Hall that actually zapped Bill Goldberg and then got him to pin 1, 2, 3. So once the streak ended, it didn't even get to continue. But 173 wins is definitely nothing to balk at. WCW living in the moment. So here in this part of the podcast, we get a story. Goldberg really exposed WCW's inability to look forward and properly plan towards the future. They really lived in the moment. He shared a story about finding out about his infamous Hollywood Hogan match while watching Thunder at home. So you imagine this, watching WCW Thunder on Thursday night to find out a few days later that on Monday Nitro you're going to win, or you're going to challenge Hulk Hogan for the WCW World Championship, the big gold, right? So that's how you find out. You have no text message, you have no email, and nothing. So no phone call. So you find out that's how you're going to end up becoming champion for the first time in your career. Very unorganized in that sense. So just days later, they managed to fill over 40,000 fans in the Georgia Dome in Goldberg's home with very little promotion. Also, it's noteworthy. This is more of a funny part of this story. But when that match actually came to play, Hulk Hogan actually pulled a very old dirty industry trick that wrestlers sometimes like to do to each other. So noting that, Hogan placed Icy Hot under his arms as a rib towards Bill Goldberg, and a rib is being a joke on another wrestler. And he placed Icy Hot under his arms as the rib, and Goldberg claims that once Hogan locked him in a headlock during the match, his vision was impaired, and Hogan was just ripping it in there, and all the Icy Hot's getting in his face and his eyes, and it's burning. And it's just a great way to break in the rookie winning his title, right? And despite this, Goldberg speared and jackhammered Hogan with ease, and that was simply due to his appreciation towards the Hulkster. So that was definitely, a kind of a fun story, funny story. I'm sure that was just an initiation of sorts towards the champion. Some people would say that, Goldberg did this on purpose. Well, yeah, he did it on purpose. He wanted to haze the guy a little. But, just another little fun story. So you see Goldberg's tearing up during the match and thinking he's happy he got a title. That's not the case. It's actually because he has Icy Hot all in his face, and it's really burning him, and his eyes are irritated. So the final, the other thing then is Goldberg did win that match. And once he did, I remember this moment being kind of a big deal. And I still remember the ability of not just the, winning the titles, right? Like Goldberg holding up the titles. He's like the king of WCW after the streak, right? And, Goldberg winning and Goldberg becoming the face of WCW. And I remember seeing like, wow, this guy's the real deal now. And definitely a legacy and a Hall of Famer of his own. Let's talk about WCW Thunder. Lots of times where Goldberg has referenced Thunder in this show, finding out about his championship. But there's a certain incident that happened on Thunder where Steve Austin brings up on December 23rd of 1990 edition of Thunder, where Goldberg smashed in the windows of a limo. And Goldberg noted that the reason behind his aggression was none other than Scott Hall. And he deemed him a piece of shit. And sadly, many felt that way about Hall. So there it is, folks. Bill Goldberg could not stand Scott Hall. He did not like him. He couldn't care for him less. And he found out that, he actually smashed the limo trying to get at Scott Hall. And, the two just didn't get along. And it's weird because you didn't see them work much with each other. And I think he would have just taken his head off. Hall was always known for doing a lot of ribs and jokes backstage. And I just think Goldberg wasn't having it. So now let's get into the WWE invasion angle, right? So there's a lot to go on with this topic. So when referencing the Time Warner contract and joining WWE during the invasion, Goldberg said, "Why would I come back to work for half of the money?" So that's when Stone Cold was asking him. He said, well, the Time Warner contract, you're already getting paid. You're in a situation where you're getting paid and you could stay home and get paid, or you could take half of the money that you're getting paid and come back and wrestle. And Goldberg said, well, why would I not sit home and get paid when I'm getting paid a full salary? Why would I take half of the money to come back? I think that's a very valuable reason and answer. Definitely you want to make the most money. I'm sure as any business guy or any business itself would want to. So, and in his answer, why would I come back to work half of the money? Goldberg noted that he originally never got along with Triple H in his invasion angle times. As things were said from afar. Furthermore, he was more slightly nervous since at that point Hunter had joined the office and held much more influence. So, with him not showing up in this initial brawl, so the WWE went on to have an inaugural brawl between WCW talent and ECW talent. And that inaugural brawl, when the invasion angle happened of WCW to WWE, was Diamond Dallas Page and Booker T. Diamond Dallas Page and Booker T, Rhino, and the Dudley Boys, representing the ECW brands. And then we had Stone Cold Steve Austin, Kurt Angle, Jericho, and Kane and The Undertaker in the inaugural Brawl Invasion pay-per-view angle. They wanted Goldberg in there, but they wanted a lot of these guys, but they were on these guaranteed contracts, so they sat out for a while. So we had to combine some WCW and ECW guys teaming up to go after WWF. So when we reference stuff like this, and like I said, he was apprehensive of coming to the WWE. He also, again, mentioned, like I said, that he didn't get along with Hunter, and he didn't get along with him, and then he having a match with Hunter, he just felt like he couldn't trust him. And Hunter joined the office, and he had much more influence and didn't want to work for a guy that he didn't trust. He mentions that he thought Brock would kill him due to sheer negative reaction. Okay, so when he was wrestling in discussion WrestleMania 20 match, Goldberg said that he thought Brock was going to kill him due to a negative reaction in the match. So one of the things I remember about his run in the invasion, I remember Goldberg eventually did come. And I remember him and Hunter having a match, a series of matches, right, around the Survivor Series time. And actually they weren't too bad. They were just, each guy was cautious. You could see them back and forth. Goldberg got a win, and Triple H got some advantages there. So, they were decent matches that I remembered I enjoyed seeing. But again, you could tell both guys were very kind of awkward in those matches. So, and I remember, again, he thought he was going to get, murdered by Brock in this WrestleMania 20 match. But Goldberg did note, at the end, Goldberg did win. One of the things that was interesting about that match is there was a lot of animosity in the locker room. Originally, it was supposed to be Brock Lesnar, I believe, going over Bill Goldberg. But Brock Lesnar stood up in the announcements and said he was leaving the WWE and just walking out and to go play pro football for the Minnesota Vikings. It didn't work out so well. So then, with this big match at WrestleMania, they almost considered putting Stone Cold Steve Austin in the match. But instead, they went ahead and went with Bill Goldberg and Brock Lesnar. They had the match. It wasn't a bad match, but WWE decided to let Bill Goldberg have the win over Brock Lesnar because they said, well, if this guy's quitting, this guy could still be around someday because he likes wrestling. And so they gave it the win to Goldberg. So Goldberg, again, noted that upon leaving the WWE, it left a bad taste in his mouth. He directed animosity towards the company along with the majority of the locker room. He just didn't have a lot of good things to say about that company, about the workplace and the environment. So he had a very, very hard time trying to do an initial, invasion once he got there and once he wrestled. He talks a little bit with Stone Cold about the invasion or joining the WWE and his own invasion, right? So I remember this. This happened the night after WrestleMania, and Bill Goldberg showed up on Monday Night Raw, and he's walking back in the halls in his Harley Davidson jacket. And upon joining the WWE, Goldberg didn't feel like he belonged since they were at competition with each other for years. Also, Goldberg noted his bad reputation and the fact that so many steered him in the wrong direction. So he was feeling some kind of not way on joining the WWE. He then got into the ring and cut a really good promo with The Rock, and The Rock's doing what he does as he does. Cut a really good promo talking about who's next. All of a sudden, Goldberg's music hits, and out comes Bill Goldberg with the smoke and the fireworks and everything. And he breathes it in and explosions. And he gets in the ring and he looks at Rock and he goes, "Hey, Rocky, you're next!" And he slams him into the ground and spears, leaving him in a painful spot. And then he gets out of the ring and leaves. And it was a great debut. And honestly, they went on at Backlash to have a really good match one-on-one. And it was Goldberg and The Rock, where Goldberg did beat The Rock in his debut in the WWE. And there was even a great post-match hidden video off of the pay-per-view where The Rock actually was laying in the ring and they started playing Goldberg's music, and he said, no, stop saying Goldberg's name. Don't bring him out there again. He hurt me. So it was kind of entertaining from The Rock playing the Hollywood heel Rock. But he just really felt like, Goldberg, he felt odd and weird, even though he got a win on The Rock, one of their main stars, and then kind of went through a couple other things. But he just didn't feel like he was in the right direction there. So then after an initial stint, Goldberg did leave, and he pursued another career, and that was he decided to become Santa Claus. That's right, Bill Goldberg decided to become Santa Claus in the epic movie Santa's Sleigh, and this is Bill Goldberg as Santa Claus. Goldberg also it's kind of a comic scary movie thriller, right? So with and just a craziness of Bill Goldberg being Santa. So one of the things that was good about this movie, Goldberg met his wife during the filming of the movie Santa's Sleigh in 2005, and she was a stunt woman that actually on the set played a stripper and accepted the role thinking that the lead actor was Jeff Goldblum. So when she met Bill, she's like, "Oh, are you Jeff Goldblum?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm Goldberg." And then from there, they just kind of had a conversation, and it's his wife today. So, you meet love in the strangest places, right? But needless to say, his movie career didn't take off as well, but even though his love life did. But Goldberg felt like after his life, he wanted to have more. He wanted to show his wife and his son, a little bit of what dad could do in the wrestling ring. And that brings back the 2016 return of Bill Goldberg. And in 2016, he explained how he explained how the 2016 Goldberg return to the WWE started. He didn't feel there was anything to prove, but harbored the negative feelings towards Vince and the business. it seemed like he simply wanted to get past it and show who he really was. Stone Cold noted that while Goldberg looked good that night, he could just tell that the vibe was off, and then something just obviously doubt in his eyes when he looked at him. So Stone Cold then brings up the Paul Heyman experience. Goldberg says, if it wasn't for Paul Heyman, my comeback would have never happened. Goldberg noted also that during his WrestleMania 33 match, he made an effort to really bask in the glory of the moment. The only time he really embraced it. And then after, he had his match, a return match with Brock Lesnar and Bill Goldberg. He basked in the glory and, just really took the time to soak it in. And then and it was a hell of a match. And if you're looking here, it was, he had a match all over. He went through the rails all the way through, hell of a battle. But what happened is, after Stone Cold put over and talked about this match, he put over WrestleMania 33. And with that, Brock Lesnar and Goldberg wanted to ensure that he played the part right in the losing effort. Truthfully, Goldberg rarely ever lost, so he never knew how to react, but it was a relief. So, that's interesting because he never really lost in his career a lot. But you can tell that, he tried to handle being defeated, as much as decent as he could. And that is a passing of the business. So, I feel like Goldberg here, it was a short, quick tap out talk, broken skull session. There wasn't a lot of big things in this one, not as well as the Undertaker one, which was part 1. You can find that in the links. But ultimately, I feel like this covered just a brief return of Goldberg. As you guys would know nowadays, Goldberg has come back in the last few years and really trying to make his presence known even more. He's had some pretty good careers. But, if I was to give my closing thoughts, and their closing thoughts, Goldberg noted that he greatly appreciates his friendship with Stone Cold Steve Austin and has always been a fan from afar. You can tell there's a genuine bond between these two when you guys look at them. One of the things I look at is I appreciated Bill Goldberg's career. I appreciated the streak. I appreciated the matches. One of my favorites, I always remember there was one with Chris Jericho where Goldberg was in WCW and Chris Jericho, being Chris Jericho, could never seem to find his way to the arena, and he would get locked in closets or locked out of the arena, or his security would accidentally lock him in rooms. So it was just a whole clown show, and he would piss off Goldberg just more and more until the match ultimately just built, right? And they've had a couple good matches, and Jericho's money. So, but yeah, I think this episode was an okay episode. I would say if you got nothing else to do, you want to play it on the background, throw it on the network and let's watch it. But the reality is, I like the Undertaker one a little bit more. We got a lot of the history of the Undertaker, but this one did cover a little bit of the aspects too. So those are my thoughts, but let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And, we're going to go ahead and head out for the day. But overall, yeah, who's next? Bill Goldberg. And then I already know who's next for episode 3 of this podcast, and that's going to be coming out to you soon. So for right now, I want to say thank you. Like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate you guys. And it's not goodbye, but it's game over.